I think about the gospel of Jesus, and when I think about it, I think of my mentor that I never met, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a young German pastor. He was born in 1906. He was a brilliant theologian. At age 21, he had his PhD, and he began to teach and pastor in Berlin. He was a brave man with wisdom beyond his years and great courage because he stood up to Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime. And he got into trouble, and his life was in some peril. He was very unpopular with the authorities. But he stood up also against the church, the state church. You can find photographs of some of the leaders of the German church at that time who were giving their salute to Hitler and who thought that just giving in to Arianism and the Nazi philosophy of treating some people as less human than others, that philosophy was a price to be paid, but if you could get in on the inside, it was a great opportunity for evangelism. Well, Bonhoeffer saw this as just a ruse. He saw it as a great miscalculation on the part of the older leaders of his church. So what he did was he stood up to it. But as he stood up to it, he was in danger. And so his friends, who knew his value theologically and his leadership ability and the fact that he was so young, said in 1939 said, let's send you to New York City. And so Bonhoeffer went to New York City, and it made a lot of sense that he was there in New York City. He was teaching at Union Theological Seminary. He could be safe there until the war was over. But he walked the streets hour after hour, asking what Bonhoeffer said was the only relevant question, and I suppose that any of us who follow Jesus would say it is also, in our opinion, the only relevant question, and that is, what is the will of God? He asked himself this question over and over and over, until finally the answer came. Return to Germany. And on the last ship out of New York Harbor to Europe, before the beginning of the Second World War in Europe, which began in 1939, Bonhoeffer was on board. As a result, he led a seminary and did some writing, and he published The Cost of Discipleship, a book that many of us know and love, along with another little book about community called Living Together, A Life Together. But then Bonhoeffer actually became a spy. He actually became complicit in an assassination plot regarding Adolf Hitler. He ended up in prison for that. And on April 6th, 1945, just a few days before the Allies liberated the small prison in Flossenburg, Germany, Bonhoeffer was marched to the gallows and hung by the neck until dead. That's the gospel of Jesus. Because you live life not for yourself. You live life for others. A life of humility and submission and obedience and sacrifice. And the reason I'm talking about Dietrich Bonhoeffer right now is not because he wrote great books, and if he'd have lived 70 years or 80 years, I'm sure he would have been recognized, that he would have been well known, that his life would have meant something important in this world. But the fact that he did what Christ called him to do, which led to a death at 39 years of age, is that it had the impact and the purpose that God had for him. And that's what I'm talking about when I say the gospel of Jesus. A life for others. Jesus was a man for others. We as his disciples then choose that same life, a life for others. And the church then becomes an organization that's for others. And so, as George MacDonald, the great Scottish writer, said, don't ask this day if you believe in Jesus or not, or you're his disciple, but just answer this question. Have you this day done one thing simply because he said do it? Or you have not done one thing or abstained from something today because he said do not do it? It's simply absurd to say you believe in Jesus and are following him if you don't do anything he says. So that's a very powerful statement. I love that statement because it tells me I can existentially become his disciple. I don't have to theorize. I just follow him. And in my following, that is the recognition that indeed I am one of his. So when we think about rebuilding the gospel from the ground up, we're talking about the gospel according to Jesus. And when we think about that, Bonhoeffer is our best example because it was a life of submission, of humility, of sacrifice, the kind of life that Jesus lived, and because Jesus lived it, then we live it. When I think about Bonhoeffer dying at age 39, it's one of those things you say, what a tragic story that is. Well, there is a sense of tragedy and loss, of course. But at the same time, that was the life that God had called him to live. And because he lived that life, there's great impact. I mean, think about it. Martin Luther King died at 39. Blaise Pascal, the great scientist and philosopher, died at age 39. Their lives all had great impact on the world. And I believe that the issue, again, is what is the will of God? And the will of God is to live that life that Christ has called us to live. And as you live that life, and as I live that life, what's really important is that our lives are a bullseye with God, that our life is right there where he wants it, and so everything he wants accomplished will be accomplished. And that's a wonderful, wonderful comfort and hope that we all have.